I'm Francis, and for years, I lived under the weight of a fate I never chose. Born into a family where becoming a doctor was almost a sacred duty, everything in my life revolved around expectations I never asked to carry. To my father, success didn't just mean being good, it meant being extraordinary in the eyes of the world. For a long time, I tried to live up to those expectations, but at 18, exhausted by the pressure and silent contempt, I decided to leave home. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but also the most liberating. I worked at a tourist hotel to support myself and, for the first time, experienced true freedom. At the hotel, I met Marcelo, who one day introduced me to a bold project, transforming an abandoned space into a luxury boutique hotel that would revive the spirit of the local community. I threw myself into the idea, but my research into the area near the hospital, where my father and my sister Jessica worked, uncovered secrets I never could have imagined. Cases of medical negligence, fraud, and stories buried under years of silence began to surface. Each discovery was a stab at my family's reputation and image. And at the same time, it was confirmation that leaving that legacy behind had been the right choice. I dug deeper. Everything I found and all the evidence I gathered was shocking. Now, I'm going to share the details of my journey to unravel the web of lies and secrets surrounding my family.
Hey guys, welcome to our channel.
My name is Francis. I was born into a family where being a doctor was more than just a profession, it was a destiny. Alongside my older sister, Jessica, we were the heirs to this legacy. From a young age, I dedicated myself to my studies with determination. I was always at the top of my class, but that was never enough. To my father, local excellence meant nothing. He believed true success only mattered if it was recognized on a national, perhaps even international scale. Under the constant weight of these unrealistic expectations, my admiration for the medical profession began to crumble. Jessica had always excelled effortlessly, while I struggled to find my place in the shadow of her brilliance. I grew up overshadowed by my older sister, who seemed to be the perfect daughter. She shined in everything she did, and my parents celebrated each of her achievements as if they were family trophies. Meanwhile, my own victories seemed dull in comparison. It felt like, no matter what, I was always falling short next to Jessica, even with 5 years between us. Jessica received all the affection, the celebrations for every small success. And I learned to be content with the echoes of a victory that was never mine. She knew she was the favorite. When things didn't go her way, her temper would flare up in verbal and sometimes even physical outbursts. I remained silent for years, enduring this abuse alone, knowing that no one would believe me. She was the family's shining star, untouchable. Over time, my parents' focus shifted entirely to Jessica, as if I were just a shadow in the house. Still, they decided I should attend a prestigious preparatory school, an investment, in the hope that I would follow the family's medical path. But I no longer wanted any part of it. As Jessica's brilliance continued to outshine mine, my parents' attention drifted further toward her accomplishments. Loneliness became my constant companion, especially when Jessica's sharp words and bursts of anger became part of my daily life. I decided I would no longer be my sister's shadow. I would carve out my own path, something that would free me from this invisibility. At 18, tired of the toxic environment and the silent disregard, I made the hardest decision of my life. I left home. I got a part-time job at a tourist hotel and started living on my own. Freedom came as a relief, but not without challenges. For months, I had no contact with my family. 6 months passed in relative peace, until one day, the phone rang. It was my father. His authoritative voice demanded, "Come home for New Year's." There was no room for negotiation. He simply dictated the rules. The weight of family obligation crushed me, but I gave in. After all, how bad could one day be? I juggled my hotel duties during the busy season. I planned everything carefully to avoid staying longer than necessary. I arranged my time off and prepared a perfect excuse to leave early. But the moment I stepped through the door of my old house, my father's booming voice hit me like a wave. "You're late. Everyone's about to arrive. Why didn't you come back yesterday?" I tried to explain about my job, but he dismissed my justification with a wave of his hand. In that moment, it became clear that nothing had changed. I was pushed into the role of hostess, cleaning the house, organizing preparations, always under my mother's critical gaze. It was as if my presence there was just another duty, not a genuine bond. As the relatives arrived, I felt like a stranger among familiar faces. The conversations revolved around patients, diagnoses, and hospital complaints. I stayed on the outskirts watching. As I listened to those stories, an idea began to take shape in my mind. Being a doctor wasn't the only path, nor the right one for me. For the first time, I realized I didn't need their approval to be happy. And in that room full of empty smiles, I decided I would never again lose myself trying to meet others' expectations. For years, I had accepted the role of the daughter who barely fit the family's mold, always hearing criticism and subtle comparisons. I knew the annual visits were nothing more than a theatrical obligation. Each year, I put on my best fake smile and attended, enduring the ritual with the same reluctance as taking a vaccine, painful but necessary. This time, however, the tradition was broken. When the phone rang, I prepared to hear my father's stern voice demanding the date and time of the family gathering. But when I looked at the screen, an unexpected name appeared, Jessica. I answered hesitantly, expecting something serious. Jessica wasn't the type to call without a reason. Her calls were usually laced with sarcasm and jabs, but the excitement in her voice caught me off guard. "Hey, have you seen the new CEO of your company? The one all over the headlines?" she asked, skipping any form of greeting. Her enthusiasm was so unusual that I paused before responding. "Oh, yeah, he's been in the media a lot because of the hotel openings." Jessica, however, didn't wait for me to finish. "Oh my God, he's amazing. Young, rich, and super smart. Have you talked to him? Can you introduce me?" Her words took me by surprise. I never expected Jessica, always so full of herself, to call asking for something like this. Before I could respond, she continued, bulldozing over any attempt to interrupt her. "He'd be perfect for me. Besides, you probably haven't even spoken to him, right? Someone like you would never catch his attention." Those words, delivered so casually, hit me like a slap. Jessica always knew exactly how to humiliate effortlessly. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Jessica, don't you think this is a bit rushed? Besides, I thought you were busy with your arranged marriage plans. Isn't that what tradition requires?" She let out a loud laugh, full of disdain. "Traditions? That's so outdated. Why should I settle for less when I can aim for the top?" Her audacity was almost fascinating. It was like watching a trapeze artist without a safety net. You know it's risky, but you can't look away. As she rambled about how she'd use her beauty and charm to win over the CEO, she shamelessly asked me to cover her travel expenses so she could attend an event where he would be. That was the moment the truth sank in. No matter how absurd the request, Jessica always assumed the world revolved around her. Any attempt to make her see reality would be useless. "Jessica, I really don't think this is a good idea." "Oh, you never think anything is a good idea. That's why you are where you are," she snapped, with that signature coldness only Jessica could deliver. She insisted that I introduce her to Marcelo, but I stood firm. I told her it wasn't feasible, that it made no sense. The tone of my voice made it clear there was no room for debate. I hung up the phone and stared at the screen in silence. As exhausting as it was to deal with my sister, I couldn't shake the thought. How far would she go to live in her own fantasy? And more importantly, what would happen when her world inevitably collided with reality? It was only a matter of time before I found out. Aqui esta a tragiceo para oingles doce underscore 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 underscore. Another disturbing discovery was the systematic fraud in medical procedures. Patients were being charged for tests and surgeries that had never been performed. A young woman named Clara, who worked as a receptionist at the hospital, showed me duplicate bills sent to health insurance companies, listing procedures that had never taken place. One of the most shocking cases involved a man who, according to the report, had undergone spinal surgery while he had never even left the waiting room. As the information piled up, I decided to look into older records. The hospital had a history dating back decades, and its secrets seemed deeply embedded in its foundations. It was in the city's public archives that I found records of investigations that had been initiated, but mysteriously abandoned, regarding deaths at the hospital in the 1990s. One investigator, it seemed, had raised suspicions that expired medications were being administered to patients, but the case had been closed without any clear explanations. Among the archived documents, I found an anonymous whistleblower letter sent by a doctor who had worked at the hospital. The letter directly mentioned my father, accusing him of being aware of the issues and, worse, of actively participating in the scheme to silence those who spoke out. Jessica, my sister, was another link I couldn't ignore. She had always avoided the subject, but her position as the hospital's administrative coordinator placed her at the center of the suspicions. One day, during a visit to the hospital, I saw Jessica arguing with a doctor. The conversation seemed tense, but what I overheard chilled me to the bone. "We can't just erase this again, Jessica. Sooner or later, someone is going to find out." That was the moment I started watching her more closely. I discovered that Jessica was responsible for approving many of the fraudulent contracts and had, on several occasions, personally signed documents authorizing fictitious expenses. I kept copies of internal emails that Clara, the receptionist, helped me obtain, showing Jessica ignoring warnings about medical care issues in exchange for financial priorities. With all these pieces coming together, my world fell apart. The hospital, which had always been a kind of family legacy, was actually a stage for corruption, negligence, and fraud. My father, whom I had always believed to be a man of integrity, was at the center of it all. Jessica, who had always fiercely defended the hospital's reputation, was complicit. I told Marcelo everything. He was my rock throughout this process. He listened carefully, holding me tightly as I tried to process the weight of it all. "You're right to want to expose this. They need to be held accountable," he said, his voice calm but firm. At that moment, I decided to take a stand. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, financial documents, emails, photos, and recorded testimonies from patients and staff. I was ready to expose the truth, no matter how it would affect my family. "Are you sure you're okay?" Marcelo asked, always cautious. He knew that the truths I was uncovering had implications not just for the hospital, but for our entire family. The question that echoed in my mind was painful but inevitable. How far were my father and Jessica willing to go to keep up appearances? And more importantly, how far was I willing to go to undo the damage they had caused? With all the evidence in hand, I knew I was about to step into dangerous territory. Those documents, the fraudulent financial reports, photos of broken equipment, incriminating internal emails, and recorded testimonies, were a powerful arsenal against my father, Jessica, and possibly others involved in the hospital. But exposing the truth meant facing not only my family, but also the system that had protected their actions for so long. I couldn't hesitate. Something inside me told me that doing the right thing was the only way to finally free myself from my family's shadows. My first action was to hand the evidence over to the public prosecutor's office. Before speaking to journalists or local organizations, I needed to ensure the justice system had the material in its hands. I scheduled a meeting with the prosecutor known for his work on corruption and negligence cases. Marcelo came with me, holding my hand as I explained everything I had discovered. "This is serious. There's enough evidence here to open a formal investigation," the prosecutor said, flipping through the documents. He seemed cautious, but also determined. I knew this was just the first step, but I felt immediate relief knowing I was finally taking action. When the first subpoenas arrived, my family reacted as I had expected, with denial. My father tried to downplay the accusations, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Jessica, on the other hand, alternated between indignation and silence, avoiding any direct confrontation with me. In a moment of desperation, my father came to me. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? This will destroy our family," he said, his anger disguised as concern. But I stood firm. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just revealing the truth. You did this to yourselves." The investigations moved quickly. During the searches, more documents were found confirming my discoveries. Records of expired medications being administered, fraudulent contracts with non-existent suppliers, and even an off-the-books fund used to cover up financial misappropriations. Beyond Jessica and my father, others were involved. The hospital's financial director, who had signed many of the suspicious transactions, was one of the first to confess. He claimed he had acted under pressure, but his statements only deepened the suspicions surrounding the leadership. The head of the medical staff was also implicated. While he wasn't directly involved in the financial fraud, he knew about the negligent practices and chose not to act, making him complicit. When the story came to light, it was as if a bomb had gone off in the city. The hospital, once seen as a pillar of the community, became synonymous with scandal and betrayal. Families who had lost loved ones due to negligence finally found the courage to speak up, and the number of complaints skyrocketed. As the investigations and testimonies unfolded, the hotel opened successfully. After so much effort, that first crowded day was a milestone. As I walked through the lobby, hearing the murmur of guests and feeling the pulsating energy of a new place coming to life, for a brief moment, I thought I could finally breathe. But the calm didn't last long. I saw them before I even heard my father's voice. It was impossible to ignore him when he decided to shout my name across the lobby, as if he were on a stage, calling for a daughter he still seemed to believe respected him. He was accompanied by Jessica and my mother, who maintained their usual haughty demeanor. "Congratulations, Francis," he shouted again, as if that were enough to erase everything that had happened. Chaos began to form. Some guests glanced over, curious. Others, clearly uncomfortable, started whispering. My heart raced, but before I could react, Marcelo stepped in. He always had that almost irritating calm, even in tense situations. He walked over to them, positioned himself between us, and, with the firmness I admired so much, tried to contain them. "You can't do this here," he said, his voice controlled but authoritative. Jessica scoffed. "We're here to talk to Francis. That's not a crime." I knew this wouldn't end well. Before I could decide what to do, a woman I barely knew, named Olivia, approached. She was one of the locals and had mentioned in a previous conversation that she knew my family. But now, there was something different in her expression. Something urgent. "Francis, can we talk?" she whispered, her tone making my stomach churn. I stepped away for a moment, letting Marcelo handle my parents, while Olivia spoke. And what she said hit me like a lightning bolt. "I didn't know how to tell you this before," she began hesitantly. "But your mother, that so-called retirement of hers? It wasn't really that. It was a forced resignation." I blinked, confused. "Forced? Why?" Olivia looked around, as if afraid of being overheard. "There was a scandal. Something involving irregular contracts. Your father and Jessica were involved, but your mother was used as a scapegoat. That's what caused everything to collapse." The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet. Suddenly, everything made sense. The evasive glances, the vague justifications, the uncomfortable silence surrounding my mother's recent past. They weren't just running from the consequences. They were running from shame. When I returned to the lobby, the situation had already spiraled out of control. My father was gesturing wildly, trying to justify his presence to Marcelo. Jessica, visibly irritated, was arguing with the receptionist. And my mother, as always, maintained her rigid posture, but her eyes looked like glass about to shatter. I tried to speak, tried to calm things down, but they insisted. They weren't there to congratulate me or make amends. They were there because they needed something, maybe a shred of respect or a chance to start over, at my expense, now that their reputations were already in ruins. And I couldn't allow that. "You need to leave," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. My father laughed, that bitter laugh he always used to belittle others. "Oh, so now you think you're better than us?" I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up my phone and, with trembling fingers, called the police. Marcelo, who had already sensed my decision, simply nodded in approval. The officers arrived quickly, and despite their attempts to resist, my parents and Jessica were escorted out of the hotel. It was painful, more than I wanted to admit. But at that moment, it became clear that there was no other choice. The news of the incident at the hotel spread like wildfire, further tarnishing my parents' and Jessica's already fragile reputations. It didn't take long for the hospital investigations, combined with my mother's forced resignation, to become the hottest topic in town. The scandals destroyed the image they had tried so hard to maintain. I knew this marked the end of our relationship. There were no more bridges to rebuild, only ruins I had no desire to reconstruct. Faced with a wave of accusations, complaints, and undeniable evidence, the hospital's future seemed uncertain. However, instead of succumbing to pressure and shutting down, an opportunity for redemption emerged. The community, despite being wounded by betrayal, still needed an accessible place for medical care. Closing the hospital would not only end an era of corruption but also worsen a local healthcare crisis. That's when a commission formed by the Ministry of Health and community representatives stepped in to propose a fairer, more sustainable solution, a complete intervention in the hospital. The first step was to replace the entire hospital leadership. My father, Jessica, and others involved were immediately removed, and an external audit was hired to map out all administrative and financial issues. Additionally, the government appointed a temporary management board made up of healthcare management specialists, respected doctors, and community leaders to take over administration. The financial department, which had enabled embezzlement and irregularities, was dismantled. A new financial director, appointed by the audit team, implemented a policy of complete transparency. This included publishing the hospital's financial statements monthly, accessible to any member of the community. The medical staff underwent a thorough evaluation. Professionals with a history of negligence or unethical practices were dismissed, while those who demonstrated competence and integrity remained. To fill the gaps, the hospital launched a rigorous recruitment process, bringing in new doctors and nurses committed to humane, high-quality care. Additionally, a continuous training program was established for all staff. Doctors, nurses, and even administrative personnel participated in courses emphasizing best practices, empathy in patient care, and the efficient use of resources. The restructuring also involved strategic partnerships. Private companies, NGOs, and even universities joined forces to help recover the hospital. The impact of these changes became evident quickly. Within a year, the hospital was recognized as an example of recovery and best practices. Patients regained trust in the institution, and the number of treatments increased significantly. My father and Jessica were formally charged. My father faced prosecution for financial fraud and gross negligence, while Jessica was accused of actively participating in fund embezzlement and covering up cases of medical malpractice. The hospital's financial director and other administrative staff were also arrested, many accepting plea deals in exchange for reduced sentences. My father, however, insisted on his innocence until the very end. The sentencing was harsh. My father received a 10-year prison sentence, while Jessica was sentenced to 8 years, with the possibility of reduction depending on her cooperation. For me, it was a time of mourning and liberation. While I felt the weight of exposing my own family, I knew it was the only possible path. With Marcelo's support, I immersed myself even further into the hotel project, using that experience as a constant reminder of the importance of integrity and transparency. Although my relationship with my father and Jessica was completely severed, I discovered that the emotional freedom of cutting those ties gave me the space to flourish. The wounds would take time to heal, but the sense of having done the right thing brought me peace. Looking back at that hospital and everything it represented is painful, but it also reminds me of the strength I found to rise above it. After all, sometimes tearing down a rotten structure is the only way to build something new. Today, as I finalize the last details of my wedding with Marcelo and see the hotel thriving, I realize I made the right decision. I left behind a history full of shadows to build a life where light and truth prevail. I am living proof that starting over is possible. I am no longer the daughter of that house, nor do I carry the ghosts that once haunted me. Today, I am free, and I have never felt so at peace.